So officers many times thinks, oh my God, we got to call forensics out or crime scene out, and it's going to take forever. They're so slow. And they're hurry up. What's taking so long? No, they're doing it because they're trying to do this correctly.
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
Before we start this episode, our guests would like to share a disclaimer that the opinions shared are their own and not representative of their current or past employment. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hi, guys. Welcome back to Forensics Unfiltered. We're so excited to have you guys back with us today. And today we have one of our Gap Science Forensic Supervision instructors with us, Bryan Macy. Welcome.
Thank you, Erin. Ashley, it's good to see you as always.
Yes, we're very excited to have a chat with him today and to introduce him to you guys and allow you guys to get to know him a little bit more. I'm sure those of you that will be joining us in this next year in our Supervision Virtual Academy and our in-person classes will get to meet him either in person or on there. But we definitely wanted to take the opportunity on our podcast to talk a little bit more about his background and then, of course, dive into, some of the types of topics we always like to talk about. So before we dive into any of those topics, Macy, if you'll give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself, kind of how you got into forensics and how you arrived with us here today.
Yep. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me to have the chat with you guys. I am from the state of North Carolina. I am from one of the larger cities in the state, Winston-Salem. Great place. I love it. I've been to a lot of places with Erin, actually, when we were meeting and traveling all over the country. And I was with the Winston-Salem Police Department for 30 years. It was a great career, great job. It had some great memories of stuff, and then it had some of the worst memories of my life. A couple things did a number on me. I lost quite a few really good friends and some acquaintances in line of duty deaths, and that's just a bad thing. It's a hard thing. And I started as a patrol officer. After a number of years, I got promoted to field training officer. And I did that for several years, training the new recruits. I was promoted to sergeant. Then I supervised squads out in the field with field services. I got transferred into detectives as a detective sergeant. And for about a year or so, I supervised white-collar crimes and financial fraud crimes. Then from there, I was transferred to major crimes and homicides. And boy, that was a trip. We had a lot of homicides in Winston-Salem in those years that I was there. It's tough. You got to make sure everything is done properly. You get one chance at it, and you don't get a second chance. Somebody asked me one time, how does it feel being the sergeant of homicides and having to work these murders and stuff? And I said, quite frankly, it feels like I get to work and I set on a straight razor and just clench really, really tight and hope I don't slip. I mean, it was rough. I mean, it was really tough.
It's rough. And actually, I feel like a lot.
I think you probably can relate to that, right?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of sergeants over homicide units feel probably a very similar way. I also think there's like a quick like a quick burnout rate for sergeants over homicide. So they, because of the stress of everything that they're handling, they seem to rotate around fairly quickly.
Oh, yeah. A lot of pressure, a whole lot of pressure. And especially as a fairly new sergeant. I mean, I had a few years in the street with that, but it was good. It really taught me a lot. I learned a ton. And that's where I really was exposed to the forensic sciences, is where I got to be able to understand the capability of how those things can benefit an investigator to get them in the right direction. And I think one of the biggest problems is that as a sworn officer, none of us really knew what they did.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, they come out and shoot some photographs and throw a little PR dust. That's what we used to call processing for fingerprints, was PR dust.
Yeah.
Because we never got fingerprints. I mean, occasionally one would, you'd solve a case here and there, but it just wasn't good. It just wasn't.
Interesting you say that too, because like in today's world, it's, at least in some agencies, it's not, the perception is not much different now.
Yeah.
That is the huge problem. And honestly, that is the biggest problem with the disconnect between sworn officers and your forensic scientists, your forensic people. That is the biggest problem with that disconnect, is because they don't understand.
Yeah. Something you mentioned earlier, you talked about when you came into the field, the law enforcement field, it was very focused on helping you stay alive, which I think a lot of officers, like even my husband, is a law enforcement officer.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very distinct dichotomy. Like him and I have had that conversation before.
Sure.
Where I will go to work and there's really no risk of me dying at work. Whereas for him, that risk is very ever present. So I think there's a lot of, just in law enforcement in general, when you have civilian units, that the value of, the civilian units or what they do isn't always weighted the same, because the officers have, this extreme risk at their job.
Yeah.
And so we found a lot of departments where, when sworn officers are placed over those forensic units, like you said, obviously they don't have a lot of knowledge of what the forensic units do, but there's also this feeling that supervising these types of units almost makes you less than as an officer, like you've been placed over those units as a punishment, or it's not a unit that you would prefer to supervise. So at some point in your career, you moved up through the ranks, but eventually you did end up supervising not only sworn divisions, but also your civilian forensic units, right?
Well, right.
And so when you stepped into that role and started supervising them, did some light bulbs come on at that moment, or how was that?
As I was nearing toward the end of my career, they had changed from civilian supervisors over the forensics folks, and had actually changed the name to Forensic Services Division. So I got assigned as the director over the Forensic Services Division. And when I went in there, I made kind of a vow to myself that for the first 6 months, I was not going to change anything. I was going to watch and observe and learn and see what was going on. The first thing I learned was I really did not know what the forensic division did. I kind of did. I kind of had an idea, but I learned real quick, you don't have a clue. You don't just come out and photograph. You just don't come out and snap photographs. Okay, let's document it. Okay, okay, we're good. No. There is a precise scientific method in how you document crime scenes photographically. I mean, there's a lot to it, right?
Yeah.
So officers many times thinks, oh my God, we got to call forensics out, or crime scene out, and it's going to take forever. They're so slow. And they're, hurry up, what's taking so long, No, they're doing it because they're trying to do this correctly.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned you waited 6 months before you made any changes. Do you think even by the 6-month mark, you had a good grasp on, I understand what the function of this unit and how it's supposed to operate, or did it take a little bit longer than that?
It really took longer than that. I'll be honest with you. I was there for almost, I think, 4 years. I never stopped learning.
Yeah.
I didn't know everything, even my last day there as the director. I didn't. I mean, I never stopped learning, and it was fascinating. Some of the things that I did, and, this really, for the summit, I'm teaching the class, Bridging the Gap, sworn and non-sworn. It's very specific about a lot of this stuff we're talking about. And the street cops, honestly, to a large degree, it's really not entirely their fault, their attitude and stuff. It's not. It's how they are trained and brought up in the thought process of doing the work of a police officer and staying alive and surviving.
Yeah. So I'm interested to hear your thought on that, because I think, like what you said, is what happens a lot of times, that people don't understand forensics until they either have to directly and actively work with them, or they get promoted over them. And then all of a sudden they start understanding how complex it is. So I'm wondering, for all of those out there listening, do you have any suggestions about how, not that they bridge the gap with their supervisors or the people directly with them, but all those people at their department, all those sworn officers that are aggravated when it takes a long time, or they don't see the value in that, or don't understand what they do? How can they bridge that gap and gain, some of that respect there, where they can really see forensics as a benefit to their investigations and things like that? Yeah. Like Arian said, it's actually kind of interesting that you phrased it in that way. And I don't know if you experienced this either, but when I started and they had the new recruits coming for the police officers, right? The new deputies coming in, they actually had like the forensic unit as not necessarily like 40 hours of their training, but at least like a day or two worth of training. The forensic people would come in and try to explain like the services that they can provide the police officers and what they do and stuff like that, which is kind of nice that there's some type of connection when they get hired and onboarded. But then over time, in their new recruit training just alone, it got dwindled down and dwindled down and dwindled down. And now it's like maybe an hour presentation that they get with the forensic unit. And in some cases, they're like, we'll just, we don't have time, so we're just going to nix this part of it as well. And we're like causing this complete disconnect instead of trying to get everyone on the same page so that they understand each other.
As a supervisor, you're trying to lead your forensic team. So not only do you have the challenge of making sure you're up on all the capabilities and all of the procedures and everything that's required to do this type of work properly, we're also challenged with having to educate the sworn officers. Because if they don't know, they don't know. And that's a problem with some of it. You've got to be creative. You got to figure out how to do that. One of the ways I did that is I went and spent 15, 20 minutes in every roll call. And that was day shift, evening shift, midnight shift. And I made sure that I did that and hit every squad. And I did it with the detective division as well. Because your detectives many times do understand the critical things of the forensic process and why it's done and what entails that. But it's not the same when you don't do it hands-on. It's just not. Well, when I was getting ready to go in, there has been another lieutenant in there before me. A good friend of mine, we went through recruit school together. But basically, they sent him in pretty much as a hatchet man. He went in and he cleaned some house. He fired several people. That needed to be fired. That was causing lots of problems. But when I walk in after him, do you think the folks trust me?
No. And I'm sure the morale is tanked.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I didn't expect them to trust me. So that was one of the first things I realized, you got to have your folks trust you. So I met with the supervisors in there. There were a couple supervisors, very good at the job, not so good as supervisors, because
You don't say.
We see that.
yeah. There were a couple that liked to take the general orders and pretty much use them as weapons. They weaponized them. You have to be careful because they'll write you up. They'll write you up if you sneeze wrong, and that was terrible. And I told them, no more of this. Look, and I said, look, I'm not here to fire people. I'm here to try to make this unit what it can be and what it should be. There were times that I came to work that I had to be in police uniform, dress uniform sometimes, whatever. If there was a function or a meeting or something I had to go to representing the police department. Otherwise, I had them order me for a set of the Forensic Services Division uniform. Well, that's what I wore to work. And then I also said, okay, on Mondays and after holidays, we are getting slammed. I mean, hammered for auto break-ins and larcenies and house break-ins. So I got with a couple of the supervisors and I said, okay, I want you to take me and I want you to put me through the training on how to properly process an auto breaking and larceny call and a house breaking call. And I went through their training program. I went through it with them, not the entire thing, but on those particular calls, because that was where we were getting hammered, and it was just killing our resources. Once they checked me off and said, you're proficient, you can go do it. I got on the radio when they were being dispatched and they were slammed, and I would say, KLS, send that call to me, assign me that call. And I would go out and process it, write the report, and just handle it. They weren't tied up on it. So I was working with them, hand in hand with them. I found out that really bought me a huge amount of credibility.
So I think based on some of the stuff that you've said, and you can let us know if you think this is true or not, but if the forensic staff and the forensic supervisors that are listening want to change the dynamic between their unit and the sworn officers that they work with, the biggest person that can influence those relationships is really the supervisor. Like the supervisor building those relationships, communicating information, going to briefings and things like that, and just educating the department on what the unit does, what they should and shouldn't be called out to, how they can be utilized in investigations, all of that. Would you agree with that?
100%. Now, obviously, they're going to have to sell it and get buy-in from their commander.
Yeah.
You're at some point, and I understand that my situation was unique. You don't always have a sworn person supervising the forensic unit. Lots and lots and lots of times you have civilians supervising the civilians. So whatever that is, whatever that looks like, you at some point have got to have that crossover between sworn and non-sworn. So you have to get that buy-in and say, okay, this is what I'd like to do, because we're finding a big disconnect between the sworn officers and our forensics folks. I don't think they really understand what we do exactly, what the capabilities are, when to call us and when not to call us. I mean, there was all kinds of stuff. I mean, they would get calls sometimes, I need ID and some of them would still say ID. I need ID to come out and do some PR dust. I mean, they did that over the radio. I'm like, nah, no.
Not happening.
We're not doing that. No, we don't do that. They've got to have that buy-in to be able to go to the briefings or the roll calls. If you have to start with 10 or 15, whatever you can carve out and they agree to, do that, because education is critical and it's tough. Now, I had an advantage because I was a lieutenant talking to the sworn officers, but I made it clear, and they're going to have to get that buy-in and have the backup from their superior sworn that's over them. to be able to say, okay, what you need to understand is when forensics gets on the scene, that scene is theirs. At that point in time, you've got to step back. That scene is theirs. They're in control of it. They direct what happens in it, everything. That was a big sticky point, especially with detectives.
It can still be a sticky point for sure.
Oh, yeah. But I made sure that our homicide guys, our detectives, understood these folks, the forensic folks, we're just co-workers on this scene. We're working this together.
Yes.
And there's points that homicide investigator is critical to have them there to answer questions, to make sure that you have the information you need to properly process things.
It's all about being a big team and getting everyone at the agency to see each other as parts of a team that are investing into and providing things to the same investigation.
Absolutely. So all this stuff is great that I'm talking about and is important, but that's just part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
As a forensic supervisor, guess what? Your other huge challenge is your personnel. Now, if you want the sworn folks to understand and have that relationship where your folks are respected and work together, guess what? You got to make sure your folks are respectable.
Yes.
You got to make sure that you have really good people who know what they're doing, who are very well trained, and they act and behave professionally. If you want to be treated as a professional, guess what? You can't swagger onto the scene like Billy Bob chewing a big wad of tobacco and spitting everywhere. Or be expected to be regarded as a professional. Doesn't happen. You've got to be professional. And that means you got to dress professional. That means you don't, pull your uniform out of the dryer and you walk in and it's all wrinkled and not ironed or pressed. You don't look sharp. You look like you slept in your uniform and then just kind of walked into work. You've got to dress the part. You've got to act the part. You've got to be the part. If you want to be guarded and looked on as professional, you've got to act. You've got to be professional.
Yeah. And I think you already mentioned the summit. So this is a great segue into the summit. But those of you that haven't attended the summit before, the 2023 Forensic Supervisor Success Summit is coming up in the middle of September. It starts September 18th. But Macy talks quite a bit about not only bridging the gap between sworn and civilian, but he does also talk about having professional staff and how you go about doing that to raise the reputation of your unit. So if you guys are interested in that training or any more training, we have a variety of speakers that are going to be talking about communication and conflict resolution at that summit. So we hope that you join us there. And then, of course, Macy is one of our forensic supervision instructors. So you guys will see her popping up throughout the next year in our virtual academy, as well as any in-person classes that we have. But if they would like to reach out to you, how can they contact you for more information or chat if they would like to do so?
The easiest way to reach me is macy@gapscience.com. And that's pretty much easiest way, I think, to remember it. It's just my last name, Macy, Macy@gapscience.com.
Awesome. And I'll make sure his email as well as the link to the summit, I'll include these in the notes below. So just click the link and you can get directly to the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Bryan.
You are so welcome. I'm terrible. This is terrible because if y'all allowed it, I would just keep talking. When I'm passionate about something, I get ramped up really easy. And I'll be honest with you, the 4 years of my time in forensics division, I think were some of the most fulfilling years of my police career. I really would have loved to have spent maybe half of my career in the forensic division because it was awesome.
Love it. We're all on that same boat as well.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
So welcome
today. We'll see all of you guys at our next podcast. Bye.
Don't forget the summit.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.